And now, as that can is going around, it is my distinct honor to introduce our speaker, Richard Blum, often known as Rich Blum to all of you.
Richie.
He is, or Richie, or Richie. He will be speaking. This is going to be real audience participation. You're going to have a lot of fun on this one.
That's easier than
By the time this is done, you may think that the worst part of your life isn't over yet. And he is going to talk about how a business failure led him to a deeper experience of Baba's presence. Rich?
Thank you. Thank you, Dennis, and thank you all for coming. So I'm going to talk about, as Dennis said, how a business failure led to a deeper experience of Baba's presence and how that has stayed with me throughout the rest of my life. And basically, I say it was a transition from experiencing Baba as being something that was external to my being to experiencing Baba as internal to my being. And more exact, I would say it's transferring the experience of Baba, his presence, where in the past, let's say before this experience, I would experience Baba's presence in the response to something such as a beautiful story that the mandala told, or beautiful music that someone was singing. After this experience, it was transitioned to being an experience that would come without any external stimulation or any external factors. Something that I could experience each day. So, I'll begin the story by telling a story that I've already told on the in my Coming to Baba story. Some of you, or many of you, may have already heard it, but I'm going to do it again because it kind of sets up. It's a good story, and it sets up how I started on my career path, which ended up in the going out of business experience. So this has to do with when I was first time after I came to the center for the first time. I told my parents that I was dropping out of college. They had kind of figured out I was doing drugs, and that I was going to move to Myrtle Beach because I wanted to be near the center, and I believed that Mayor Baba was God. That didn't go over real well. I took out God Speaks in order to help them understand exactly who Mayor Baba was and show them the chart with the planes of consciousness. They didn't get it. So we had deep trauma in the family for this period of time. I was supposed to be a doctor. I was dropping out. What was I going to do with my life? My parents, basically up to this point in time, I couldn't do anything wrong. You know, it was like my whole life was, according to my parents, my whole life was falling apart. And their life potentially was going to fall apart too. So I had to finance my living in Myrtle Beach, and so I was going to take money out of a bank that had been like bar mitzvah money, had accumulated, birthday money and so on, moved to Myrtle Beach. But the account was a custodian account. You need your dad's signature. And that wasn't going to happen. But they said, if you bring a birth certificate, that would work also, because I just turned 21. So I got a birth certificate, and then I decided, I told my parents I was going to take this money out and move to Myrtle Beach. And my father came home that day for lunch. He never came home for lunch. He always had lunch with my two uncles who were partners in his business, or he would go out with a friend. This day he came home, said to me, "Are you still planning on doing this?" And I said, "Yes." He said, "Then you're in trouble." And he ran into the kitchen, opened the phone book, ran out of the house. So I went to the kitchen, looked at the phone book, was turned to private detectives. And I thought, oh, okay, this is interesting. So I went to the bank, Now, I have to say, my father was a businessman in Pittsburgh, and he knew bankers. And I think he may have called the bank because when I got there, they saw my birth certificate. They said, oh, wait a minute. They went back, spoke to somebody in the back office, and said, oh, we can't do this today. So then I thought, oh, this is not good. So I didn't know what to do, so I went and visited this fellow who I just had met named Dennis Portnoy, who had a health food store in 1971, made carrot juice. And I told him what happened. He said, oh, my parents were so happy I came to Mayor Baba. He said, I was doing heroin, and now I'm drinking carrot juice all day. So I went home, and I wanted to basically avoid my father. But he came in the room where I was watching TV. This is after he came home from work. And he said, well, maybe there is some good to this Mayor Baba. He said, I called down to that center in Myrtle Beach, and I talked to a lady. She seemed very intelligent. Her name was Elizabeth Patterson. And she said, why did you all come down to the center? So he said, if it's okay with you, I made reservations for next month. I said, well, if you want to go, I'll go. I don't care. Being a little arrogant. And so we did. We came down, we went into the gateway. I think Marshall was manning the gateway at the time. And he said, oh, Kitty's waiting to see you. So we drove right over to see Kitty. Kitty came in. The three of us, my mother, my father, and myself. And Kitty looked at me, and she said, now I have to explain that also. I was beginning to meditate during this time, and I was kind of strange. I would sit at the dinner table and stare off into the distance. So anyway, Kitty looked at me, and she said, now you've been meditating a lot, haven't you? And I thought, oh, this is good. She can tell how, I'm advancing. And she said, no, this is not Baba's way. Baba's way is through love and service. So my parents were delighted to hear that. Then she said, now, what are you doing with your life? And I said, well, I just dropped out of college, and I'm studying some ballet, I'm taking some art classes, I wanted to go to I was thinking of a Zen monastery, so that I couldn't go to the center. And she said, no, Baba would want you to finish what you started. You must go back to school. Now my parents were totally delighted. So then she looked at them and she said, now, he's going to follow Mayor Baba for the rest of his life, and there's absolutely nothing that you can do about that. Which, I didn't know it, but that was my heart's dream, to follow Baba for the rest of my life. And whether I was in college or whether I was here living in Myrtle Beach, I didn't know at the time. It didn't really matter where I was. So I say all that because I did eventually go back to college, and that's how I ended up in the computer field. So it took me 2 years to go back to school. I made a bunch of trips down to the center. I worked for my dad and could make enough money to go to India. I made 3 trips to India. And then
Whoa, it's all or nothing. Huh?
Then
Don't make it lower.
I went back to school.
That's good.
Okay, so then I wanted to actually study computer animation at this point in time. And I applied to this school in California that I found out actually had a program in computer animation back at this point, in the 70s. It was a California Institute of the Arts, but I did not get in. And it didn't matter because my father basically said he would pay for any school as long as it was in Pittsburgh, where we lived. So Pittsburgh, the closest school and the best school was Carnegie Mellon. It was a 15-minute walk from my house. So I figured they would have a good computer engineering program. And it turns out they actually are one of the best schools in the world for computer science. So I started the program. They didn't have computer science degrees at that point, so I had an electrical engineering major. I kind of had to start all over again, almost, because I had been a little more liberal arts pre-med before. Anyway, I was terrible at electrical engineering. I was okay at math and science, but electrical engineering just was not intuitive to me. And a friend of mine told me he had worked out to have a self-defined major where he could focus on computer science. So I approached this professor, who was his advisor, and I said, I'd like to do a self-defined major in computer science. He said, fine. And I came up with this idea to have a major that was the application of computers to art, literature, and music. And he thought that was great. And I would go and visit this professor's name is Herbert Simon once every 2 weeks. And he was known on campus for being the founder of artificial intelligence. He and this other fellow on campus. He and maybe a half dozen other people in the country were the founders of artificial intelligence. He was also unusual because he had a position in computer science, psychology, and business administration, plus he was a philosopher.
Whoa.
And really to sit with him, I almost felt like it was the Mondley. There was a presence to him that was very soothing and very intelligent and very, very nice. He didn't think much of Mayor Baba, though. I gave him the discourses, and he just said, "Oh, not that impressed." Well, I'll just mention, and I'm going to mention this and a couple other people, just to say, because en route, I met a number of people who were very successful in one way or another, particularly computers and business, and it only accentuated my failure when it actually happened. So when I was watching television, a few years later now, I'm just going to jump ahead quickly about Herbert Simon. I was watching the news one night with my wife Lori at the time in Boston, and I see on the news announces that the Nobel Prize in Economics this year is going to be awarded to Herbert Simon. I said, Herbert Simon? He was my advisor. So this is what the Nobel Prize Committee said about Simon. He said, Simon's scientific output goes far beyond the disciplines in which he has held professorships: political science, administration, psychology, and information science. He has made contributions in, among other fields, science theory, applied mathematical statistics, operations, analysis, economics, and business administrations. In all areas in which he has conducted research, Simon has had something of importance to say. So, the other thing I'll point out is the work I'm doing today is also multidisciplinary in a sense that I'm trying to combine science and spirituality, physics, neuroscience, artificial intelligence with Mayor Baba. And so he himself was a multidisciplinary person, but he was a lot smarter than me, a lot more accomplished. So another fellow who I met along the way, his name is Andy, and I can't pronounce his last name. He was from Germany, and he was a grad student. I ended up getting a master's at Carnegie Mellon in computer engineering after I had my self-defined major. And during that time, this German student came, and one day I was in class. We had to do different projects, and I wanted to do a project in computer music, and some people joined my group, and this guy Andy came in, and he said, well, I think this is how we should do it. And he scribbled something on a piece of paper, and it became clear, oh yeah, that's the way we should do it, which it would have taken me weeks or months to figure out how to do it. He just intuitively knew how to do it. But this fellow, I found out years later, went off to Stanford, got a PhD in computer science, built a computer as his PhD project. That computer became known, it was the computer that became Sun Microsystems. Sun Microsystems, you've probably not heard of, but it became a very large computer company. Then, that he made lots of money on stock, and then he started another company, made lots of money on that. And he's a legend because when the two guys who started Google, they were at Stanford years later, they needed to start their business, and they were told, well, go talk to this guy Andy, because he's investing in young companies. So they came to him even before they had any business corporations or papers or anything established. And he said, well, here, we liked their idea, wrote out a check for $100,000. And
Wow.
is one of the first investors in Google. So I mentioned that, again, to compare his success. Like, he's worth $6.some billion today. So
What are you worth? You were going to tell us.
not much. So
Actually,
you have that which is without price.
Well, that's the point. That will come later, yes. That will come later. So then I go off, I got a job after school, and I worked for this company called Data General, which was an up-and-coming computer company out in Boston. Got married, had some kids, and at this point in time, the personal computers were coming on the scene. I got an Apple computer, the Apple II, and I started playing with it, and my manager was kind of getting interested. Also, he had a friend who was now a vice president at Apple. Apple was still a really small company. And so he told us to go meet this guy, Mitch Caper. So we went over and met Mitch Caper one night. Mitch saw this program I had started making on the Apple II. He liked it. He was very impressed by it. And he told us about what he sees the market was. And he was developing some software with a partner who was in, I think, either Harvard or MIT business school at the time. And he had been a student at one of those schools. I think at MIT business school. Mitch also knew about Mayor Baba. He was into TM, and his roommate, not his partner, but his roommate had been to the center and had the discourses on the shelf there. So I went off to India shortly after that for just a regular visit. And while I was there at Maribot, I got a strong hit that what I wanted to do was develop software for these small computers. Came home, talked to Mitch. Mitch said, oh, I have a need, because I could do a certain type of programming he couldn't do, or his partner couldn't do. So anyway, I did a small project with him. Then he wanted to take that product he had created and take it and join this other company that was marketing a program called VisiCalc. VisiCalc was the first of the spreadsheets prior to Excel, or Lotus 1-2-3. So Mitch bought me out for a few $1,000s, and a couple years later I realized that Mitch had sold that product for $1.75 million. So I think you'll see a theme running through this. But I then took a year off and wrote a program. It was a drawing program. It was called the Illustrator, not to confuse with Adobe Illustrator, but it was a drawing program similar. And it was a nice drawing program on the Apple II. And I eventually found a publisher for it, but before that, I began showing it to people in Boston. And I think Mitch had been the president of the Apple Computer Club at that point in time, or the Boston Computer Club. Anyway, I went and I gave a demonstration. I think there were a couple hundred people in the audience that night. And afterwards, Mitch approached me and he said, you know, I'm starting a business and I'd like you to join my business. And basically he offered that if I, joined and contributed my software, I would have stock in the company and I could continue that. And I said, well, I really want to have my own business. There's a theme here. And he said, I understand completely. And at this point in time, it also became clear the possibility that we could move to Myrtle Beach, which I'll get to in a minute. So I turned that down. Well, Mitch started a company called Lotus 1-2-3. And I guess most of you know that became a huge business. The guy who wrote, actually Mitch did not write 1-2-3, but the guy who did write the software was in the cubicle next to me at Data General. He'd gone off through it and ended up working with actually kind of a partner of Mitch's. And I don't know, I think IBM eventually paid like $3 billion for Lotus. And but what I did do was move to Myrtle Beach. And also at this point in time, I actually found a publisher to market my product. They were a California company. I had a contract with Atari, and I had a contract with Commodore, who was an up-and-coming computer company at the time. So, and another project I worked on was called the Bank Street Writer, which was a word processor for the Apple II computer, which was got a write-up in Time magazine, it became very popular in schools, and I had a small part in it, but I was getting royalties on that, I was getting royalties from this product on the Apple II, the drawing program had developed. So I moved to Myrtle Beach, and I started working, and I got a condo.
What year was that?
This is now 1982. We moved in like Halloween of '82.
Mm-hmm.
And Tom Talley has a degree in computer science,
Mm-hmm.
so he started working for me.
Mm.
And I rented a condo. Tom had a sleeping bag, and he would sleep on the floor in the condo, and he would eat garlic. That was a bit of a problem. So, out of the blue, I got a phone call after about 3 months of living here in Myrtle Beach. And the phone call was this guy said he was seeing my software. Someone had demonstrated it in a store in New York City, and he liked it, and he said he's developing a computer, wanted to know if I would develop software for this new computer. And I said, well, first of all, I thought it was maybe a crackpot. And I told him, there's Apple and there's IBM. There's really not going to be room for any additional companies. I was right about that. So at this point in time, I also knew that my publisher had told me that someone was interested in investing in them because of my product. And they were investing like $500,000. But I kind of put two together. I asked him how he got my phone number. He said he talked to the company in California. And I figured, he was the guy who was investing. So I asked him, what have you done in the past? And he said, well, I've headed up some corporations. And I said, you mean like being the president of a corporation? He said, yeah. So I talked to my dad a few days later, and he had a friend who was a stockbroker, and the stockbroker got some information. He said, this guy Richard Black, yeah, he's real well known. He's headed up Addressograph, Multigraph, and he headed up a company that made shock absorbers. And so anyway, he was legit. So long story short, he decided to fly down to Myrtle Beach. I told him he could fly on Piedmont, and he said, well, he checked into that. He said, called me back. He said, the schedule seems too difficult. I'll just fly my own plane down.
Yeah, right.
So I go to the North Myrtle Beach Airport to pick him up, and I see these 3 guys coming. I thought, oh my God, he's brought a whole team of people here. Well, they were the other 2 were his pilots, carrying his bags for him. So anyway, he agreed. He was going to invest money into the business, $500,000, and we were going to locate it here in Myrtle Beach, and everything was looking good. Around the same time, I have to say that we were living in Briarcliff West, which was really a lot of fun back then. I'm sure it still is. A lot of Bible lovers. We had little kids. Other families had little kids. We had the swimming pool.
Yeah.
So it was like college campus almost, kind of extended. And but I would take walks in Briarcliff, and there were a few Baba people who had homes in Briarcliff. And I grew up in a nice home, and I thought, I really want to live in Briarcliff too. And so out of weakness, one day in Baba's bedroom, I asked Baba for a home in Briarcliff. And I've learned you have to be careful what you ask for. And as Bonnie said, you need like need a lawyer, when you're asking something for Baba, to be really exact. While we're on the subject of money, I just want to mention 2 things, kind of parallel to the story. I was telling people I was interested in computer animation in the 1970s. And most people's idea of a computer in the 1970s was this big room full of IBM IBM mainframe computers, $1 million machines, fill a room this large. And no one could really understand how can you do animation with a computer? Well, one day I was describing how computers could be used for animation with Monty, and she immediately understood. And I knew she understood because she said, if you could do that, then you could do this. And I said, yeah, that's right. In other words, she got the idea and she could extrapolate beyond that. So it just indicated to me how incredibly intuitive Monty was. And the other thing that's pertinent, I remember to the story in a sense, is the feeling of Baba's presence. There was one day at Marizot that was really full of love. And I remember Monty afterwards, I think when we were saying goodbye, she said something to the effect of, Bob, she really felt Baba's presence strongly today. And it was just like when Baba was here in the body. And that kind of made a deep impression on me that, oh, yes, how to recognize Baba's presence. So, okay, so now the question was, now they got this venture capital, was where to find programmers in Myrtle Beach, South Carolina. You know, Boston would not be so difficult. I knew people in Boston. And there's a whole network of people there. Boston at that point was like Silicon Valley is today. So Tom Talley was there, but I began making connections, and David Silverman was one of the connections I made. David has a master's in computer, no, you have bachelor's in computer science, had been working for Control Data Corporation. So David was one of the victims that moved down to work for me. Anyway, at the end, we had about 9 people working at what was then called Master Software. And I think at least 6 or 7 of those 9 were Baba lovers. 2 were not. And people moved either themselves or their family down to be working. You know, maybe 4 families that moved down. And we did good stuff. Right, David? Yeah. My problem was I gave no attention to sales and marketing and a lot of attention to developing software. So Rick Black just wanted to take my original program and market it. Well, or variation, but I somehow had already been off doing different things. I'm more, I like to be creative and innovative, and sales and marketing was not my thing. So I thought I'll just develop a lot of software and I'll find other businesses to market it. Well, that kind of worked, but the first group of software was called the Mr. Pixel series. It was educational software for kids that taught kids through drawing how to do rudimentary programming, how to do animation, and how to make even their own computer games. There's 3 products that we actually got out the door. And there was a publisher in Chicago who picked it up, paid us several $100,000 for them, and so on. We didn't get the money all right away. We had to finish each one. We were developing for the IBM PC, the Apple II, and the Commodore 64. And then we were also developing a painting program. It was pretty good, pretty ahead of its time. But we were also running out of money. Because I also underestimated how long it would take to develop software, which used to be very common in the software world. I think nowadays maybe things have tightened up, but it's like if you're building a house, it's very innovative. You don't know, if you've never done it before, you don't know how long it's going to take. And software is like that too. You think it's just going to happen quickly, but it really doesn't happen quickly. And back then we were developing in a very rudimentary type of language, machine language, assembly language, which was even more difficult. So anyway, kind of just jumping ahead to the fact that, well, because of the venture money and selling a house we had in Boston, I was able to build a house that I now live in Briarcliff Acres. So we were able to get a lot. I have to say my parents had a lot. They bought one for an investment, but they did not want us to use that. So Katie told us we should buy our own lot. We bought that lot. We built the house, which is also crazy to be building a house and starting a business at the same time. And when we moved into the house that week, I realized we're going to run out of money. And in spite of the fact that we had these programs with the publisher and a big chunk of money from venture capital, over the 2 years that we've been working, I hired 10 people. I just went through the money. So things were not looking good. I remember, I think it was like early January, maybe 1985 now, going in and telling everyone that we're going to have to close the door. And people had moved their families down to come here and work, and there were not comparable jobs in Myrtle Beach for them to find. except for Tom Talley, he's working at the Gateway.
Yeah, comparable, yes.
But, you know, he didn't have a family. And so, you know, that put them in kind of a dire situation. But I have to say that I was more concerned about myself than I was about them. I was so upset with myself and so, well, I'll get into that in a minute. Anyway, I was too selfish. I mean, I was concerned about them, but I couldn't, you know, I was much more humiliated and felt a total failure. And I thought I was smart. I thought I knew the computer industry, and I actually thought that Baba had given me all of this because I was a good Baba lover. Got the house in Briarcliff, got the business going. You know, all of this was because I was a good Baba lover. So we didn't go bankrupt. I mean, we just closed the doors. A few people stayed on and finished projects that we had, and that kind of took us to the summer. But during this time, and other people, some people stayed on.
What year are you in now?
1985. Some people stayed here in Myrtle Beach, and but other people, some of them moved away. And so anyway, I was wrestling with like how this had all happened, particularly why Baba had allowed this to happen. Particularly, well, if I was a good Baba lover, you know, why did he let this happen to me? And it's not so much even the other forces. In other words, well, I was thinking, okay, who's to blame? Okay, we were trying to work out, one of the problems was we were over 6 months, we were trying to negotiate with the publisher who was marketing our software for the second product. And they were willing to go so far, but they required it to be finished first. And then anyway, I kept thinking we were going to get there, and that's why we kept working, and that's why we kept going. And so they were leading us to believe that this was all going to work out. In the end, it didn't work out. So I was thinking, okay, was the publisher to blame? Was my investor to blame for not putting more money in? Was I to blame for screwing everything up? And if I was to blame, why had Baba allowed me to do that? And not just the external events, but why did he allow my thinking to go so wrong? So, and I began to really either be angry with Baba or begin to have some doubts about Baba. And I began to wonder, like, well, if Baba was God, that meant he controlled everything. And why, you know, again, I was questioning, why did he allow this to happen? And I was wondering, well, maybe God realization is just like a state of mind where you don't really control, as Baba says, every leaf that falls off a tree, but you just, you have the experience that you have that power, but you don't really have that power. Yeah. So I began really deeply questioning Baba. And I guess you could say I was depressed. I was humiliated. I felt a failure. I began to doubt everything that I'd ever thought was correct. And I was wondering, like, well, if I was wrong about this, I must be wrong about everything. So one day in Baba's bedroom, I had a strong hit from Baba. Well, he never really promised that we would be successful in life. He promised that we could be happy through his love. And his love, you know, if we relied upon him for our happiness, his love was always there. Well, that kind of helped me a little bit, but I really wasn't feeling that love. Maybe, I think in that moment I might have, but not, it didn't last. So the business closed up, and I just was able to go to India. And I think I went by myself, because I think my son was still too young, but I can't remember if he was with me or not. If he was just 7 years old. But anyway, I went to India. I think I was there by myself. And I began to tell some of the Mandali what had happened. And Mani said, well, Baba gave you an opportunity, or several opportunities, and it just didn't work out. Okay. that seems right, but it didn't go to my core. It didn't really satisfy me. Erich was very cool, because I told him that even my faith in Baba has been shaken. And I thought maybe he would say, well, what type of Baba lover are you to have your faith shaken? He's so weak in your faith, but that didn't face him at the least. He just said, my confidence had been shaken, and it would come back again. So, that was nice to know. But again, it wasn't really satisfying me. Previously, in all my trips to India, I had always felt Baba's love. And this trip, I was completely cut off from Baba, in the sense that I wasn't, I was still suffering this pain that I was experiencing. And I realized that, I wasn't accepting Baba in totality. I still had this idea that, maybe God consciousness doesn't really give you control over everything, and thoughts like that. So the experience that happened, that changed everything, happened in this Baba's samadhi. I think it was there after lunch one day. And I was longing to once again feel Baba's love. And so I was in there, and I realized that if I wanted to feel Baba's love again, I had to accept Baba in totality. I couldn't partition Baba. I couldn't say, this is what the experience is, and not this. I had to accept whatever he said as being the truth. And then I thought, well, if that's true, then why had Baba allowed this to happen? Was he punishing me? And I thought, well, no, it wasn't a punishment. Whatever he did with love. And so whatever experience I had, and he orchestrated, he had done out of love. And I began to feel this weight lifting off my heart. And as I did, I began to feel Baba's love. And as it lifted, I began to even feel something greater. So I wondered, okay, why had he done this? Why, what was the goal in all this? And I realized that the goal was for me to have the experience I was having that moment in the samadhi. And when I did, all of a sudden there was this rush of bliss that came over me, and this love just completely consumed me. And I realized that it allowed me to feel his presence at a level deeper than I had ever felt before. I felt his love on a much more deep basis. And I just sat there in that experience. How that changed me was because I meditate, I was able to recapture that experience, basically on a daily basis. And although the pain, I shouldn't say the pain just left completely and never returned, because first we stayed in Myrtle Beach, and I still was trying to figure out how to get my life back together. I guess I don't want to say it's a technique, but what I discovered was that when that pain is present, I need to turn that pain into a longing for him. I have to, when there's pain, there's usually something in the world that's causing the pain. Let's say in this case, failure, or worried about money, or relationship, or something like that. So I turn that pain into a longing for him. And when I long for him, truly long for him, and not long for Baba to fix whatever in the world is not working, and when I truly long for his presence, I feel his presence. And I re-experience that bliss and love that I felt in the samadhi. And over time, that has stayed with me. So that's the story.
What have you done since though? How did you work? How did you?
I ended up teaching computer science at the college here for about 3 years. Which I didn't particularly enjoy because the students were not well prepared, although I hear now it's a much better school. And I began developing other software, and I eventually did the same thing. I found a publisher for it, got some other projects, eventually developed a website. People created computer animated banners for websites. So that's the career aspect of it. Family money too, I have to say. Yeah.
It's just, I know you are very open and vulnerable in the way you share it, and I really appreciate that. And
Thank you.
just wondering if you feel, but how did you deal with, because you felt bad you had involved other people, who had changed their lives and all that. How did you, especially coming from what Baba gave you, how did you then work with that feeling of,
You mean, did I ever apologize?
And make amends.
or inside, how you work with it?
I did that. Well, I have to say, there was one person who, I won't mention whose name it is, but one employee who was particularly difficult, who, and he went through some rough times here in Myrtle Beach. But he moved away and then did fine. But, we become good friends after that. So I guess I could say I've remained friends with people. And, I don't know, David?
Yeah, as a former employee, I can say I will always be grateful to you and to Kitty, who, when I expressed to her that I wanted to move here, she said, "Oh, you need to get in touch with Richard Blum. He may have a job for you." And, she acted within seconds.
Yes.
And so for me, of course, I sympathize with what happened to you, but this was the greatest thing in the world that happened to me, that I was able to come to Myrtle Beach and live here. And so that's how Baba works. So even though it didn't work out the way we expected it to, for me, it was a priceless gift from Bob.
Well, thank you, David. Dennis?
If I get the chronology right, this story sort of ended around 1985, 1986.
Yes.
In the still of the night since then, have you ever had this creeping wish that you could have had your Baba and eaten it too? Meaning that you could have made a different move earlier, either sold that thing, made your $1 billion, and sat in the Samadhi every day, enjoying yourself forever and ever. Have you ever had that thought?
Yeah, every day.
Well, that only makes you human.
Great. And yet, if I had to choose between, let's say, having the life of Mitch Caper or Bill Gates or someone like that, and the life that I've been able to live as a Baba lover, and this experience, I'd still choose this experience. Yeah. Unless I was back then. But no, I would still choose this experience.
I was thinking too that, you never had any ill intent with, you always had good intent with the people that you hired, and it wasn't any, ill intent on your part at all. And not, we always helpful to look at ourselves, of course, but,
Yeah.
it's kind of, it's what happened, and then got David down here and gave people some work for some years. And
Yeah, we had fun. Yeah.
A lot of fun.
Yeah. Linda?
Would you say now that you're deeper in Baba's experience, that you see that whole thing? I was asking Rich if now that he's deeper, like 20 more years in Baba's experience, does he see the whole thing differently? In other words, it had nothing to do with Meher Baba. He wasn't controlling you in any way. He doesn't care what happens on planet Earth. He only cares about our soul. And so the questions you were asking are not things you would ask today. Like, why did you let me do it? Those kinds of questions. I mean, that's how I see Baba. It's not, I don't see it as, he doesn't care about the world and how we're living it.
Well, he cares that we love others.
Well, no, I mean, if it's not a spiritual realm,
Right.
I'm not talking about the spirit realm. I'm talking about the work, you know, what pants do I wear? What movie do I see? What job do I take? What car do I drive? Like, none of that. Do you see it differently now that you're more immersed in Baba?
Well, I'm not sure. I mean, I would say that I agree with you that he, on one hand, he doesn't really care so much what we do. On the other hand, I think he cares how we do every moment.
Right, but we're talking about two different levels. That's what I'm saying.
Yeah.
Do you see it on a different, that's exactly what I'm saying.
Mhm.
Do you see it on a different level now? The wise old man now.
Not so old.
I'm not sure how to. I mean, for me, there's if you operate each moment as Baba would want us to operate, then I think that's what matters, and these other things should work out.
Right, because you're on this level as opposed to this level.
Right, but it also, I mean, I still encounter things that can cause me pain, and so I still, in some ways, deal with issues like I was dealing back then. So, I don't know how much, you know, things have changed in that sense. I don't have those questions like I did back then.
Do you remember what Eric said to Steve Edelman after his divorce? Well, they weren't yet divorced, they broke up, and he was bereft, and Eric grabbed him and said, "Brother, do you think Meher Baba gives a damn about your marriage? All he cares about is your soul." Or something, I don't know what word he used, your spiritual life, or some word.
Right.
That.
Yeah, I think that's very true. I mean, obviously it's true.
It's karma, baby.
Yeah,
So
yeah.
you have to have that. That's my attitude. Everything is that's supposed to happen happens, and there's no mistakes. So you have to just kind of go with it, whatever it is.
We don't have much choice.
That's
Yeah.
right. But I mean, you can have the choice of kicking and screaming and fighting it, or you can have the experience of saying, you know, well, obviously it's supposed to happen, so I might as well do my best, you know,
Yeah, feel comfortable with it, or
at least deal with it on a more logical or karmic basis, I guess. I mean, Mirwan, the last thing he said to me before I left India a few years ago, right before he died, he said, "Remember, there's no such thing as a mistake." And that's just kind of like, okay, you know, that's really far out.
yeah. Nick.
It's a little awkward for me to ask a personal question in a public forum, but you're sitting there, so you
All right.
ask for it.
Uh-huh.
Why do you write? What do you feel now about why you're writing what you're writing?
A couple things. One is, for myself, I really feel the need to integrate science and spirituality. So part of it's just for my own gratification or for my own spiritual need to bring the two together. The other is because I think it can help people who are very scientifically oriented get a view or understanding of God that could help them accept God and Meher Baba. And partly maybe because I want to become rich and famous.
Do you think Dr. Simon would want to read today what you're...
By the way, how's that last one working out? I'm curious to know. Is it working out? Are you
It follows pretty much into my pattern of business success.
Close, but not
Yeah.
quite.
They don't call you rich for
You
no
are
reason.
rich.
That's true. Yeah. In name only. Yeah, Ira?
When is your second volume coming out?
Yeah, I tell everyone it's a year away, and whenever anyone asks me, how, it's still a year away.
You said that last year, Rich.
That's right. It's kind of like software.
Next year in Jerusalem.
Software always takes longer.
Have you begun the third volume yet?
No, it's on the second volume. You,
I just want to, it just reminded me of Harry Kenmore a little bit, because remember what Baba said to him? He said, you were fated to be this rich doctor, but
Brain
if
surgeon,
if you'd been Bill Gates, you wouldn't be here now. I don't think so.
probably not.
But maybe you would be doing other things.
Yeah, I mean, Bill Gates does good things, but yeah, no, you're right. No, and I think that's what, when I say that I still would prefer the life that I have to having that great success.
Just relative to that, I always loved reading that Ivy Deuce once said to Baba, but Baba, I wanted to be a concert singer. And Baba said, well, I've had plenty of concert singers. I need you to do this
Dennis?
The thought I have an awful lot, since I have so many regrets in my life, I can't count them, is that we always romanticize what we think would have happened. But see, here's what could have happened. You could have made a different move. You could have made a lot of money, decide I got to move to California, because that's where the action is, then got into a head-on collision, on 101 in Los Angeles 30 years ago and been dead. And that's the way things can actually, we never view it that way. We all think, oh, well, that road not taken is strewn with diamonds and star rubies. But in fact, anything can happen in our lives in a split second that changes them utterly. And we never quite think about that.
Yeah. Good point. Pat?
Rich, this feeling that you got in the tomb of Baba's presence, strong presence, which you've been able to replicate in your meditative process, how does that express itself in your life that wasn't there until that happened?
Well, I could say this, the challenge now is to bring that into life. I mean, I feel that, and that I haven't done so well.
What do you mean to bring it into life? You feel it, and then
To share it with other people, or have it feel Baba's presence in my daily work, my activities, so to speak. Not have it in a separate, isolated period of time, in my own isolation.
So how do you judge yourself? You say you haven't done very well. What would you envision it feeling and seeming like to which you would say, I'm doing this as Baba intended?
Right. Well, I could think of someone like Kitty, who, in my experience, I think for a lot of people, they go into visit Kitty and they come out happy. So I think Kitty was living that life of sharing that love and Baba's presence. So that I think that would be a goal.
Well, you must have done something right. You've turned out Baba lover children. This is rare amongst Baba lovers.
Yeah. Lori also was a contributor to that.
What's your secret?
We took our kids to India. And they grew up here. But yeah, they, you know, I know Lori actually played a major role because she kind of emphasized Baba. I was more like, kind of let them discover it on their own. But she was more pushing, so maybe it was a combination of the two of us. And I think also the fact that they did go to India quite a number of times. And that really, and the use of hobbies played a big role also.
Hey, Rich, if you went to sleep tonight and then you went during, you know, while you're sleeping, this miracle happens and you didn't know it, but the miracle happens where Baba turns the key and you're able to embody in your life, in your day-to-day life, that his spirit, and you wake up in the morning, how would your life be different, or how would you be?
I'll come back in a few months and answer that.
I'm just thinking, what's one thing might happen when you went out that
I thought you were going to say, what if I woke up extremely rich? So, the jet airplane I'd get, and
You'd give us some, right?
of course.
Rich, don't you have that, aren't you the ability to fall back on all the impressions that we take on with some of these big materialistic successes and things like that, that, you know, maybe you're a lot better off in this lifetime, the way it worked out.
Good point.
And to really believe that, it's hard to look at it that way, but.
Yeah,
The more money, the more problems.
that could be. Yeah, Dennis.
For my information, how many of the people in this room grew up in Jewish homes?
Jewish.
Grew up next to
Raise your
Jewish
hand,
homes.
Dave.
I mean, had a
Get it up
Jewish
there.
mother and father.
How many
All right,
people grew up
here's
in
a joke.
Jewish homes?
Let me, I think because I have a kindred spirit sitting out there. There's a joke that a Jewish fetus becomes viable when it graduates medical school. And there's a great, if you're a Jewish boy, especially in a certain kind of Jewish home where the parents are hardworking, maybe they were blue-collar, white-collar businessmen in the Depression and in the 40s, they were pushing their children to become incredibly successful. And that is literally from the first moment you're out of the hospital. So they're thinking about you winning the Nobel Prize, they'll tell you about Dr. Jonas Salk, and on and on and on and on and on. And that gets coded very, very strongly. And if you then grow up and you become even fairly successful by the standards of society, but you don't meet that certain mythical level of success in your own mind, you often feel you didn't make the cut. And I can tell you from experience, it's true in my case, I think it's true in Rich's case, and many others. And it's karma too. I mean, you didn't have to be born in a Jewish family, but that's a karmic thing that you have to deal with. And it also puts up a very interesting tension when you've had that upbringing and you become a Baba lover. Because although Baba is very much on doing what you should do, you know, he even advised certain people to become doctors and everything else, nonetheless, Baba's values are, of course, totally different from worldly values. And what he really demands is a head-on collision with some of those values that you're brought up with. So it becomes an interesting bit of eddy currents in your mind for years and years and years.
Right, and you know, when I dropped out of college, as I said, I was supposed to be a doctor, and so you know, my parents were really upset about that. And even today, when I'm with my cousins and my brother, they're all either very successful or married to people who are very successful. So it accentuates the feeling when I get with my family.
Are they doctors?
My brother, 2 doctors, 1 psychologist, one person just married to a very wealthy person, and one person who's husband is a vice president of Fidelity.
Very nice.
Yeah. She's a psychologist, too.
Oh, okay, so then that's all
No
right.
one can say they married another Babala.
That's true.
And
You know, I
these-
think we're still counterculture. You know, we
Oh,
might have
yeah.
been counterculture back then, but we're still counterculture.
Yes, yes.
You heard that one, the Jewish tragedy, my son the waiter.
Harold
Yep.
Rudd.
So somehow, as an antidote, that joke that I think Erich had told in Mondley Hall about look who thinks he's nothing.
Oh, yeah.
Do you remember that joke? So there are these, you know, in a synagogue, there's a couple of rabbis, and one of them gets just filled with this connection with God, but doesn't feel worthy and says, God, I'm nothing. I'm just nothing before you. I am absolutely nothing. And the other rabbi gets all caught up in, I'm nothing. And the janitor who's cleaning up gets caught up in it and says, I'm nothing. And they look at him and say, look who thinks he's nothing.
The other one was somebody snuck in late at night in Marizot and
Yeah.
He was trying to get by and Padre said, who's that? And he said, oh, no one. He said, you ain't no one yet.
Okay, well, thank you, everyone.
Oh, thank
you.
Thank you.